welcome back to the Warwick F1 show. This is episode 7 of the 2025 season, and in this episode today, we are just going to be previewing some of the narratives and some of the news ahead of the Japanese Grand Prix this weekend. We've had a bit of news, maybe a slight bit of news in regards to a driver change that is par for the course for Red Bull at this point. And I am your host, Anwar. We are joined by Callum and Daniel, who are frequents of the show, and then Oran, who is also a returning guest. Let's start with the most important bit of news that has come across the F1 world this week, and that is the news that Yuki Tsunoda has officially replaced Liam Lawson in that second Red Bull seat. Firstly, I want to ask Oran this question. How surprised were we when we saw this news come across, and how surprised that they've actually made this change to only 2 races in?
I'm quite surprised they've made it this early, because knowing Red Bull, they normally wait halfway into the season before doing it. So the fact they made a change 2 races in kind of shows that they weren't very impressed with Liam Lawson's performance. But I do think it's a good thing they've done it this early, because it means that they've given Yuki Tsunoda the opportunity to have the entire rest of the season to get used to the car. And it also means they put Liam Lawson in the RB, so he'll be performing better, so it shouldn't hurt his development as a driver.
See, this is your take seems very different to the takes that Daniel and Callum had, who were very critical of Red Bull for making this decision early. Now, I want to rack your brains in terms of why you think it's a positive thing. Do you feel that Yuki Tsunoda has a better opportunity to get points than Liam Lawson and outperform the performances that Lawson was putting up?
I mean, I honestly think that Red Bull is basically undrivable, so whoever they put in that second seat isn't going to do well. But I think just Lawson being a rookie is that he needs the confidence to do well, because it will probably hurt him if he keeps driving for Red Bull, finishing 18th and 19th. And we know Helmut Marko isn't the nicest of people, so it'll really get him down, and then it'll probably hurt him in the future, because realistically, if Red Bull then choose to get rid of him, they've then got Arvin Lindblad coming through in F2, so that's an RB seat gone, and then it leaves Liam Lawson with nowhere to go.
I'm not entirely sure, really, that Tsunoda's going to do much better. To be completely honest, we know how undrivable. We've heard, I guess, that kind of podcast interview that Alex Albon did, where he really went into great depths of why that second Red Bull seat is so hard to drive. And I just think, I know Lawson is inexperienced, but it's not like he's a bad driver or anything. I mean, we've seen what he's capable of coming in for a few races. He did that for RB in F1, and surely then the pressure was on him. It's his first chance in F1 that he ever had, and he delivered on that day. So I mean, we'll obviously be doing our predictions a bit later on, but and my prediction does kind of hint at this. But I personally, I don't see Liam Lawson doing Yuki Tsunoda doing any better, really. I'd love for him to, because I think Tsunoda deserved that seat over Lawson when when the decision was being made over the winter. And I know there might have been some decisions not purely based on the abilities of the driver. There might have been some influence from Helmut Marko. We know how much he wants to get the driver academy involved, and the drivers from that driver academy up to the main Red Bull team, and that might be why Lawson was the priority, because Tsunoda's obviously wasn't from the Red Bull driver academy, he's from Honda. But yeah, I do really have I have hope for him, but I don't have expectation for him. But that's not me saying that Tsunoda's a bad driver. That's just me saying that I have no faith in the second Red Bull seat for anyone.
Yeah, I completely agree. I hope Tsunoda blows out the water and gets into Q3, gets good points. I just think it's unlikely. I have changed my stance on this slightly, actually. I thought it was incredibly harsh, and I still do think it's an incredibly harsh move to drop Lawson after 2 races. But at the same time, that statement that was released by Christian Horner about the duty of care for Lawson, and everyone at the time was like, oh yeah, duty of care, you made the wrong decision, you want to get Tsunoda in the car, and you just dropped Lawson for no reason. I think there might be an element of truth to that. Either Christian Horner's telling the truth, or he'd make a really good politician. Because I saw the interview that they did with him at the Red Bull show run that they did in Tokyo on Wednesday. And he it honestly sounded like Lawson was struggling a lot. Just the feeling of defeat after qualifying last twice in a row and the miserable races that he's had, it sounded like he was downbeat. And we heard Bernie Collins on the F1 show with Sky Sports as well, was saying that she was on the plane home with Lawson and he did really look down and out. So maybe it was the best decision in terms of his confidence, because we've seen the spirals that those drivers can get into at Red Bull. You know, Perez was just spiraling further and further down into poor decision making. You know, his head was just gone in that seat. So maybe it is for the best that, you know, they recover Lawson while they can and put someone more experienced in to develop the car, I think.
Something I think we also should just quickly mention, sorry, I don't want to take up too much time on this, but it's, I think one of the other decisions I think I've heard from someone, I can't remember the exact source, but I think because I think Honda was very keen to get Tsunoda in that second Red Bull seat when the opportunity obviously came about, as obviously it would be good to see for them a Honda driver academy driver in that second Red Bull seat, and Red Bull in the end decided to go for one of their own drivers, but because of how poor Lawson's performance were, they went back to Honda and saw if they were still open for that deal of maybe paying a certain amount of money or something else like that to get Tsunoda in that second Red Bull seat. And Honda came back saying that they would still be keen for that. However, they wanted to get him in for the Japanese Grand Prix, because obviously it's a home race, not only for Tsunoda but for Honda. So I do think as well that might have played an impact of why this decision has been made so quickly. Because obviously in typical Warwick F1 show fashion, we all predicted that it wasn't going to happen, and then 2 days later it did happen. But I think that might have been one of the factors that played into Red Bull's hands, not only trying to recover what they could of Lawson and his confidence as an F1 driver.
I want to pivot this discussion into something that I feel like we need to. I think we should have a little bit of a standard in terms of what we would expect out of Yuki Tsunoda. So I'm going to ask, starting with you, Callum, and then going all the way around the room, all the way around the online studio as it is. What would be a good performance for Yuki Tsunoda this weekend?
To be completely honest, I'm not even sure at the moment if he has to live up to any sort of standards, because Tsunoda is actually in quite a nice position, really, because Red Bull at the moment, with how fast they've made that decision after 2 races, there's no way they're going to do that again. And also, there's not really anyone else that they can bring up. So Lawson was in a difficult position because he had to perform, because Red Bull knew that there was a very experienced and talented driver waiting in the wings for if Lawson wasn't performing. But Tsunoda doesn't really have that as much, in a sense, especially there's not any other drivers in the Red Bull Academy or the Red Bull family, I should say, that are waiting. You're certainly not going to promote Isaac Hadjar that quickly. So I think a good performance for him would maybe, I'd even just say getting into Q2. Like, I think that's actually, maybe getting into Q3 would be pretty good. But I mean, Red Bull will have more expectations for him because it's Red Bull and they want their driver to be fighting near the front. But I think maybe just getting points from this race is a good performance for him. My expectation, that's just me, maybe my expectations on this Red Bull second seat now are just so low, because we've seen so many drivers succumb to, so many talented drivers and also experienced drivers succumb to this Red Bull curse that we've associated with this second Red Bull seat. So I think for me personally, if he was able to maybe get into Q2 or be fighting around the kind of bottom end of the points for his first race, I think I would call that a success for Yuki Tsunoda.
I think most of the pressure for this weekend is coming from the home fans, not Red Bull. Because another thing Horner said was, if Tsunoda doesn't perform much better than Lawson, then we're going to have to focus on developing the car to make it drivable for both our drivers, instead of switching them out until we find someone who can drive it. So in that sense, the fact that it's the first race for Red Bull is his home race, that probably builds up the pressure a little bit, but I don't think there's much from the Red Bull side. And that's what I think. That's what I've heard. So for me, I completely agree with Callum in that I think Q2 would be a good step up. But I don't think anyone's going to blame him if he can't get out of Q1. Everyone's going to blame Red Bull, blame the car, not Tsunoda. So yeah, fighting around 15th to 10th in the race, maybe capitalize on some chaos if there is any to get a couple points, but just slowly build into that Red Bull and just learn and develop as much as he can, really, I think is the main objective for him.
For Tsunoda, I don't really think there's an expectation to live up to because, like you said, there's not really much they can do with that second Red Bull seat. So I think for him, it's just trying to maximize performances, try and get as close to Verstappen as possible, and just, well, I've seen with the Red Bull's a tricky car to drive, so just getting used to the way it drives, finding confidence, and maybe more from Red Bull's side, not being as harsh on him if he performs poorly to try and keep his confidence high. So that should help him do a little bit better.
Right, I want to play devil's advocate here because all of you guys are saying that this car is really undrivable, and we have set our expectations pretty low in terms of what he needs to get. What happens if Tsunoda ends up finishing in the top 5 this weekend? Let's say he qualifies in the top 6 and finishes in the top 5. What does that do to our perception of Lawson and that second Red Bull?
I'm not sure if it really does much, to be honest, because we've still, even if Tsunoda does happen to be, I think it might not even be because he's like miles ahead. I can't imagine that Tsunoda, I do love Tsunoda and he's a really talented driver, but I don't think he's miles ahead of the likes of Gasly and Albon, especially we know how good Albon can be on his day in that Williams car as well. I wouldn't say that. I think it would just maybe point to the fact that Tsunoda has a more similar driving style to Max Verstappen, so he is more suited to that car in a way. I do hope it happens for him. But something else I would just like to quickly point to, actually, just before we get Daniel and Oran's take on it, is I would like to issue a public apology to Sergio Perez because we have slated Perez on this podcast for like the past year because his performances were dreadful. But I think that was down to the Red Bull seat, and Albon, he has mentioned in his podcast how it's kind of a snowball effect with when they tried to develop this Red Bull car more and more throughout the season to get it more, make it more sensitive on the front, essentially, to incline more with Max Verstappen's driving style, and that seems to align with how how Perez just seemed to get worse and worse. So I think obviously Perez still didn't do an amazing job, but I think we should have focused more on this second Red Bull seat curse when he was driving. But yeah, bit of an aside there. But yeah, I think Tsunoda doing well will just point more towards his particular driving style and less towards his ability. Because I feel like if he was this much of an incredible driver, then we would have noticed it already with him in the V-carb seat.
Well, Callum, I would not like to issue a public apology to Sergio Perez.
Oh, I like this. I like this.
I'm advocate this time. I think there were moments from Sergio Perez where he did things in that car that were not due to the performance, and it was just due to his head not being in the game. I think of immediately what comes to mind is Singapore and Japan 2023. Firstly, in Singapore, he was fighting the Williams of Alex Albon. They were in the fringes of the points, I think, P9 or P10. And, I don't know what corner it is, but there's a really tight hairpin at some point in Singapore. And Sergio Perez, with no warning, lunges Alex Albon and dents into his side pod, basically barging him out of the way, and then continues on his way into the points. And that ruined any chance of Albon getting points in that race, which you cannot pin to the performance of the car. And maybe you can say, okay, but he wasn't comfortable in the car, so he was just frustrated. He was trying to get anything out of it that he could. But in the situation where a driver cannot get from the car what they want, you need a stable driver who can just keep their head and isn't going to panic. They're going to stay calm. They're going to work to find a solution. And I just don't think Perez was that driver. Sure, his driving style didn't suit in the end when they were developing their car more towards Verstappen away from Perez. But and like I said, in Japan as well, who was it? Magnussen. Yeah, it was Magnussen. There's another hairpin in Japan. And he did the same thing that he did to Albon. He just lunged Magnussen, hit his rear tyre. And you could see it coming for 2 laps previous as well. He was getting closer and closer to dive bombing Magnussen. He was checking it out. And he just didn't commit fully. He dangled his tyre in. He took out Magnussen, which ruined any chance of him getting points, and I don't think he was even in the running, to be honest. But it's just desperate. It's just causing unnecessary damage. And so I don't think we can say that the second driver curse, in terms of the driving style, is fully to blame for Perez's woes, in my opinion.
I think I do agree that maybe come the end of especially last season, or to be honest, probably the whole of last season, where he just wasn't on it. I do think that is a little bit because of it, again, this kind of snowballing effect that Albon was on about, where it just the car just and the drive just gets away from you. But I mean, Perez, we should remember, is like the only driver out of the past 4 that have managed to actually get something out of that Red Bull car from the start, especially in his first 1 or 2 seasons with Red Bull. I thought he was really good. So, but anyway, that's obviously not the point of this discussion. We're kind of getting off topic. So, but yeah, I would like Tsunoda to do well. Yes.
So would I.
Right, let's put a nice little bow on this discussion about the Tsunoda-Lawson swap and look at some of the liveries that we are going to see this weekend. So we have, I believe is it 2 or is it 2 or 3 new liveries for this weekend as special liveries for Japan? We've got the Red Bull, we've got the Haas. Is that it?
I think so.
Because I saw that Stake had their Stake car. I'm pretty sure that was an April Fool's. I would find it hilarious if they actually brought that on track.
Surely not.
Honestly, it'd make my day. It'd be hilarious. But
I hope so.
It would add a little bit more personality to the grid. But what's our opinions on both of those liveries? Is there one that is above the other, and are they better than the original cars? I'll start with Oran with this one.
I'm massively disappointed by Sauber. They've decided to make an incredible livery that is better than their original one and then not run it.
I agree entirely. They
put more effort into that livery than the one they're actually running for the rest of the season, and it was a joke. Honestly,
they put more effort into that livery than probably like actually building their car in the first place. I can't lie.
What was the other one? Oh yeah, the Haas had the cherry blossom on it, which I think is actually quite a nice touch, and it's quite a nice looking livery.
I thought that's the best one of the lot, actually.
And the Red Bull one is interesting. I mean, I'm just assuming they're doing it so they can run the RB car, so the second driver can get performances. But I think it's as well. I think they kind of had this planning because if they were in talks with Honda about getting Tsunoda in, it is quite nice to have, a Japanese livery, Japanese driver.
I think this was more of a homage to the fact that this is their last Japanese Grand Prix with Red Bull, more so than the Tsunoda stuff. But regardless, is it just me that this because we've already got a white car in the grid already in terms of the RB, that this white Red Bull doesn't hit the same? I don't know. That's just me. Does anyone feel the same?
I do still really like the Red Bull car. It just means it's going to be very difficult to see which one is which, just determine, especially if Tsunoda is near the back or around the midfield where we'd expect the Racing Bulls to be. But yeah, I still really like the Red Bull one, and it's actually going to be quite refreshing to them to see them actually run a livery that they've created in a race, because usually when we see a different Red Bull livery, it's when they come along in the winter testing and say, we've got this new livery, and then they just go with their one that they've run for the past 7 years. The Haas one is absolutely incredible, I have to say. I think with the addition of the pink blossoms, it's just, I think it really is beautiful to look at, and it really does kind of add and go beyond what was already an incredible livery. But yeah, all pretty good liveries, I'd say.
You know what I really like about the white Red Bull is the red circle over the driver numbers, which kind of represents the Japanese flag. I just think that's a really nice touch. They didn't have that on the original white Bull, which was supposed to be run for Japan in 2021, but it got cancelled, so they had to take it to Turkey. But I think that's a nice touch. I like the red is darker than usual, which I think
the red's a nice color, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what's gonna.
It's like silver. It's like glossy, kind of dark red, like blood red.
Exactly.
It's actually, yeah.
And I think that's how you're going to tell it apart from the Racing Bull as well, because that Red Bull is yellow and slightly lighter red. But overall, it's I think it's better than their usual livery myself.
It's more, yeah. I think I agree in terms of the RB. I'm just bored of Red Bull, to be honest. I'm just bored of their livery being the same year after year. So I guess in that sense, I like the fact that it's a little bit different. I do think that was a cool noticing of the red spot for the driver number. I thought I didn't make that connection at all to the Japanese flag, but it makes a lot of sense. It also feels a bit retro in terms of like how cars from the 70s and 80s have just had a circle with like a very, very simple circle with a number. So it had a little bit of a retro feel to it too. I want to pivot this discussion towards stuff in regard to some narratives before this race, because the McLarens have won these first two races. I know that Hamilton won the sprint, but do we think that we start having a discussion of McLaren dominance if they proceed to win this weekend?
Well, I think I was going to say, I think actually just if we get another McLaren dominance performance, we might have to bring back in the rule for the predictions that we have to choose separate people for first place. But I think it does kind of feel that way, especially at least in the pace in the car, because I think we got confirmation last time round in China that they are the fastest car on the grid, and they've got two drivers who are in brilliant form. I think Norris continuing his amazing pace from last season, and hopefully seeming so far to be ironing out those mistakes which were plaguing him for some races in 2024. But also Piastri looking stronger than ever as well. So I think, and at the moment, I think maybe not just so the fact that McLaren is so dominant, but also because the other teams aren't as good as we thought they were going to be. Mercedes are kind of around where I thought they'd be. Russell being very good, and then obviously Antonelli being there, but not expecting too much of him, obviously because he's a rookie and he's only had a few races in the car, and he is still 17, 18 years old, something like that. But also just the fact that Ferrari aren't as good as we thought they were going to be. I think all of us probably, I think in our predictions for this season, we talked about Ferrari being Constructors' Championship or there being this great battle between McLaren and Ferrari. And it just hasn't happened. Ferrari, if anything, have been the third best team on the grid behind Mercedes, which I don't think any of us were expecting at all. And Red Bull obviously having this horrible situation with their second seat. Obviously, Verstappen's up there. But it just is, I think it seems more that the competition isn't there compared to McLaren being dominant. So it might be the case that after this race, if we do get another 1-2, we get another McLaren win, that it does start to feel that way, which is an unfortunate thing because we don't like F1 to be predictable whenever team is at the front, but it might be turning that way.
But apart from other teams' incompetencies as well, relative incompetencies, I guess, I think McLaren have just done a really great job. I mean, they've been on a dominant trajectory since the middle of 2023, really. They've brought upgrade upon upgrade, which is correlated. They've been able to put it on the track and it runs. You know, they've got quite a wide setup window, which works for them, I think. So all in all, they've just built a really competitive package. And so it's just down to the drivers and the trackside personnel to execute that at the race weekends, make sure they extract the maximum from that car, which, you know, they've, I guess you could say they've come close to so far this year. I mean, we've only got a sample of 2 races, but obviously Piastri in Australia wasn't optimal. But I think it's been, their execution so far this year has been better than what we saw last year. I think there is hope for a Ferrari resurgence. I mean, I'm not a delusional Ferrari fan like so many are, but I think they could turn up. I think the China sprint kind of showed that there is pace in that car. They just made so many changes going into race day that it was unrecognizable, really, from what they'd shown the previous day. So I think there is potential to be unlocked and potential to develop that car into a place where it can challenge the McLarens. But Red Bull and Mercedes, I think, are slightly behind the curve. I'm not expecting so much of a resurgence from them. I think 2026 will probably be the main focus for them now.
I'm a massive McLaren fan, so I'm quite happy with the situation right now. But there's just something about Verstappen that scares me, because he always, no matter how bad the car is, he always has exceptional performances, and it is also supposed to rain in Japan, so I am a little bit nervous. But as the McLaren situation, I think it's brilliant. I mean, 22, the 8th, 7th fastest car, and 3 years later, we're now easily the quickest car on the grid. I did expect a bit more from Ferrari, but then obviously they had a Ferrari moment, so they're not doing as good as they should be. But I think that car has actually got some good pace, so I think just that Hamilton getting used to the car and then the engineers also working out to set up the car properly without getting it disqualified, they'll probably be fighting for the front. But I could see this being like a two-way fight between Lando and Piastri for the title.
Interesting. So I guess you're kind of ruling out the possibility of any other driver making at least a challenge for it, do you think?
I think only Verstappen, really. I mean, in order for another driver to have a turnaround, their car would have to have a major upgrade. I think Mercedes with Russell could potentially, because he's now got 2 third places, so he technically is the closest person to McLaren. But I think the car's slightly behind, but I think an upgrade would put him there. Ferrari, I think they showed in China they had pace, but something went wrong between the sprint race and the main race. And I think just Verstappen is just scary because you never know what he can do with that Red Bull.
I think there's definitely a fear factor with Verstappen, particularly when you mention that the weather conditions and the forecast for it. Let me just give the people at home a brief overview of what we're looking at. Friday, which is FP1 and FP2, chance of rain, according to the F1 website, is 0%. We've got a 20% chance of rain on the Saturday for FP3 and quali. This should be just light rain potentially, but we'll see how it goes. And then the race has an 80% chance of rain. And this is something that I wanted to touch on before we start going into predictions here. And that is, how much does the fact that we're having rain, how much does that change our predictions looking forward to the weekend?
I've literally just changed my predictions because I found out that it's raining, and that is involving putting Verstappen higher, because we know, we talked about this for Australia, that rain is the great equalizer. We've said that many times, but yeah, the more experienced drivers are going to favour more in the wet, and we had a perfect example in Australia how when you're not very experienced, that the rain can be a game changer. It can put you out of the competition completely. And so I think this will mean that Verstappen has gone from challenging for a podium to being a very real threat for the win if it's raining conditions, because he is undoubtedly at the moment the best driver in the wet on that grid. I would say Brazil last year is exhibit A of why that is the case. So I think Norris will also stand a very good chance. I think he's also been very good in the wet, and he favoured very well in Australia. But Verstappen could be serious contention for the win, I think, for Japan.
Japan's a very technical circuit in the dry, so when it rains, it becomes extremely difficult. And we know Verstappen is. I don't want to keep talking about Verstappen and how good he is, but Verstappen is a very good driver, and in the wet he does excel. So I think he'll do quite well, and I think it might end up hurting Tsunoda because he's got to get used to that Red Bull. And we saw Lawson in Australia; he crashed out the race. Don't think Tsunoda will crash, but I don't think he'll be able to pick up the pace as quickly since he's never had wet running in a Red Bull.
I think you're right about Tsunoda as well, because when he's hopping into a new car, there's not going to be a whole lot of confidence, a lot of familiarity with the car. And Suzuka is a track that rewards confidence anyway. And then when you're tackling it in the rain, I imagine even more so. So there's kind of all these factors that are stacking up against Tsunoda now. It seems more and more unlikely that he's going to be able to slip into the points. But we can hope. But Suzuka in the wet. When was the last wet? 2022, I think, was the last wet Japanese Grand Prix. That was a crazy one. We had Sainz spinning off on the first lap. I think it took about an hour for the race to get underway anyway, because it was raining so much. So when it tends to rain, it really rains. So that could really throw a spanner in the works for a lot of the teams. And Verstappen's just a beast in the wet. I can't wait to see what he does.
I think it just sets us up for a little bit more of an exciting race here, because there's a little bit more discussion. Like, Callum mentioned earlier about his predictions changing. I am chopping and changing my predictions as we go on across this episode, because I can tell you I've had 4 different drivers in P1 over the last half an hour. So
4 different drivers?
yeah,
Well, the 2 McLarens, what? The 2 McLarens, Verstappen and what? Russell or Hamilton?
Russell.
Oh, interesting. Okay, fair enough. Yeah, it's gonna be interesting. It is.
So I guess that's a nice little segue here into asking you guys what the predictions are for this weekend. Just to remind everyone, we are running a little bit different of a format this year. So we are looking for the driver who's on pole, which if you get right, award you 3 points. Your entire top 5 for the weekend for the actual Sunday race, which will award you 3 points if you get it completely correct in terms of a single position being right, and then if you're one off, you get 1 point. We are also looking for a driver that DNFs and a wild prediction, which is kind of a little bit of a wild card one, where similar to last year's 3-point predictions. So I think we should start off by asking Callum what his predictions are for this weekend.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so we'll start off with my pole position then. I went with Verstappen for pole position. I just think that even though maybe the Red Bull race pace might not be there, I still think Verstappen can put it together in one lap. Like we said, like Daniel quite correctly said, Japan is a track that rewards confidence, and Verstappen will always be in the form of his life somehow. But then I have put Norris for the win. I do think even if it's in wet conditions that Norris can still maintain a win. I put Verstappen second because I think Verstappen, as I mentioned, will be a very real threat. Russell I've then put in third, Piastri in fourth, and then Hamilton I've put in fifth. I just do think that Hamilton is also very good around this track, and so he and hopefully he'll be able to get something out of the Ferrari. I guess that means that Leclerc's sixth or below, which I haven't really considered, but we've got so many good drivers to put in these top 5 positions. Driver to DNF, I've gone with Doohan, just thinking of someone who's inexperienced and maybe not in a very good car, who, given the wet conditions in the race. And then my prediction is that Tsunoda does not make Q2. So he goes out in Q1, essentially. He's bottom 5 in qualifying. Yeah, that's my predictions.
Cool. Can you just remind me what your top 5 was? I got everything else. So.
Yes, yeah. So that was so Norris was P1, Verstappen is in P2, Russell rounding out the podium in P3, Piastri in fourth, just missing out, and then Hamilton in P5.
Piastri P4, Hamilton P5. Got you. Cool. Do either Daniel or I want to go next?
Yeah, I'll go. Okay.
Awesome, Daniel.
So, opposition is going to be Lando Norris, because I think he's going to bite back at Piastri. Momentum doesn't really seem to mean much in Formula One these days. If the track's good and the driver's feeling it on the day and the car's in a good window, they're going to perform. And I think Norris still has an edge on Piastri in terms of qualifying pace. So I've gone for Norris for pole. But the winner is going to be Oscar Piastri. Purely because I think on the whole, they are a lot closer, those two, this year. And I just think there are going to be some circumstances where Piastri is going to come out on top. I have decided not to change my predictions because of the rain, mostly because I had Verstappen pretty far up anyway. So I was just like, well, he's just going to stay there, to be honest. He's just going to extract the maximum from the car no matter what, which I think is good enough for P2. So Verstappen P2. Fun fact about him, he's won the last 3 races in Japan by an average of 19.7 seconds to second place, which is crushing. And one of those was in the wet, of course, which I believe was the biggest margin of the lot. And that wasn't even the full race. So I think he's just going to drag the car up higher and higher. I've gone for Norris.
He seems to like the track. He seems to be very comfortable here.
Especially in that first sector, right?
Yeah.
He just destroys it every time. P3 is Norris. The McLaren's going to have good pace. Enough for a podium, but I'm not expecting anything special from him, to be honest. I had a bit of a crackpot hypothesis in the China review about the front limited circuits not really suiting Norris. This is very much a front limited circuit because of the number of sweeping corners. The next two are vibes, really. I'm not sure where I got them from. I just
As they
got them
should
out of
be.
a hat.
As
Yeah,
they should be.
At this point, like, it just is. Leclerc is P4. I don't know where Ferrari are going to be. No one does. Maybe they'll turn up with
I
their
don't think
no
they
end
did, to be
plate.
honest.
Yeah, maybe they'll turn up with their no end plate philosophy and go half a second clear of the field. But we'll have to wait and see for that one. And Russell P5, because he's on form right now. He seems to be getting pretty much everything out of the Mercedes that he can extract, which is great. At DNF, I've gone for Alex Albon because he's failed to finish all three of his Williams starts in Suzuka. He's had 2 crashes and a mechanical failure. So I'm just saying it's a bit of a bogey track for him, and it's going to continue in that way. And a random prediction is Hadjar points, because Racing Bulls won't fumble the strategy this time. I think they're going to have a strong talking to from the management, the strategy team, and they're going to get their ducks in a row and capitalize. But also, I think Hadjar's just a brilliant driver, to be honest. I watched a lot of F2 last year. I think he was the driver with the most raw pace out of the whole F2 grid last year. So I just think he's going to extract something special. Obviously, if it's raining, that's going to be a lot harder. And we saw how he coped with the rain in Australia. So maybe I should have changed that
Couldn't
one.
even make it a lap.
Yeah, okay. Maybe that one's not coming in. But I looked at the lap times for China, actually. And he was very close to Ocon, who finished P5 in the end, like, in terms of pace.
The RBs were really quick last weekend.
Exactly.
Last weekend.
That 2-stop it just made zero sense. It was like a Ferrari 2022 decision from Hungary where they just saw that the hards weren't working and just like, I've had a brainwave, we'll choose hards. Like, what are you doing? Anyway, 2-stop was not the strategy, not the favorite strategy. But yeah, he had a lot of pace, and I think he's going to capitalize on that this weekend.
Cool. Oran, do you want to go next, or would you like me to go next?
I'll go next.
Cool. Hit me.
My pole position prediction is Lando Norris, because I think McLaren do currently have the fastest car, and of the 2 drivers, Lando has outqualified Piastri the last 2 times they've gone to Japan. So I think he's going to do it for a 3rd time. Leading on to that, my top 5, I do think Lando will win the Grand Prix from pole, because hopefully he won't bottle the start like he normally does. But he's got Piastri to defend him.
His starts have been pretty good this year, though.
Yeah, they have, actually. He's doing better.
We were 2 races in. We can't just base it on that.
We absolutely are basing it on 2 races. It's a big
3 races
guys.
after.
I hope it's better. I do hope it's better. He hasn't made a mistake so far, which is good for him. So.
Moving on to my top 5, I've put Lando for the race win, Piastri P2, Kimi Antonelli P3, which just kind of lead onto the wildcard prediction.
I like this. I already like it.
Max Verstappen P4 and George Russell P5.
Right. My one complaint is Verstappen is too low here, but you'll see what I think in a bit. And then you put Russell to P5. What was your driver that DNFs?
My driver that DNFs is going to be Isaac Hadjar.
We've got 2 sides of the coin here.
I'm really regretting my decision now.
It's just because when I watched him F2, like, because it was him and Bortoleto going for the championship, Isaac Hadjar sort of had like these sparks of pace, but you could always tell that he sometimes pushed a little bit too hard. And considering it's raining, I can kind of see a mistake coming out of him, especially if he's like 11th or 12th pushing for points.
Yeah.
And then my wildcard prediction, as you've seen from my top 5, is that Kimi Antonelli will finish on the podium in Japan.
Right.
I would love to see that, but I think that's maybe a bit optimistic ahead of Verstappen and Russell in the wet.
You know what? I want to hear him out here. What has been like the prophecy that you've heard for you to decide that Antonelli's finishing 3rd?
I don't think it's a prophecy.
Not.
I think it's something he's been smoking or something. I don't know.
Kimi Antonelli is an incredible wet weather driver, and I don't think Australia did him justice. But I think in Japan he is going to cook.
Honestly, I can get on board with it. I don't have him in top 3, but he's up there in mine. So I personally back your claim here, Oran.
You said his Australia didn't do him justice. He went up 12 positions in the race to finish 4th from 16th. I mean, if
Yeah,
that's
but
not doing him
I meant in
justice,
terms of the podium thing, but like, that's what I
oh,
mean.
okay, all right.
He's got it. He's gonna do it this time.
No, I agree. And Antonelli
Well,
as well. He has a lot of confidence. Like, you can look at him wrestling the wheel. He would use all of the track to take a corner, which I think is quite important in Japan. But if he pushes too much, I think I could see a mistake from him. But yeah, no, I agree in that he's a great driver in the wet.
I would love to see him on the podium. It's just I wonder if that's a bit far from him at the moment, especially with how many good drivers there are. But if it happens, I'll be rooting for him.
This is what the podcast is for. I want to hear these somewhat rogue predictions, and I can see the logic behind it. Right, moving on to finish off the prediction segment, I've got mine. I have also said that Pole will be going to Lando Norris. I think that the McLaren is still the quickest car, and I still think on one lap pace he has an edge over Piastri, so long that he doesn't make a mistake. Because I feel in both qualifying sessions last week he made an error. I think he'll right that wrong this weekend and put that car at the front end of the grid. In terms of the top 5, I've been deliberating for a while on this, like swapping in and out. I currently have Lando Norris first, and I'll probably stick with that. I just think that the McLaren has got really good pace in the wet. We saw that in Australia. And so if there is any issues in terms of the two McLarens, it would be through an error. And I just think, for whatever reason, I've got this thing in my head where I feel like Piastri might be a little bit more likely to make that error. So I put Norris on to finish on pole and finish first in the main race. I put Verstappen in second. I think it's a bit of a safe bet, to be honest, for him to perform. And he kind of came out of nowhere during the Australian Grand Prix back in Melbourne, and I feel he's going to do a similar thing here. Third place, I have put George Russell. I think he's been really consistent so far. He's always been in and around the good positions to score points. So I think it's a safe bet to have him there. Fourth, I've gone Piastri. I feel like he's got a bit of an error in him. I don't think he's got the pure pace that Norris does, particularly in the wet. So I've put him fourth, and I will say Antonelli in fifth. So I also think he is a great wet race driver, and I think he will show that again this weekend. In terms of driver DNF, I've gone a little bit different to everyone else. I've gone Carlos Sainz. I feel he's had a bit of a rotten time so far compared to Alex Albon in the Williams. And for whatever reason, I don't think he'll shake it off this weekend. So I will put that there. I'll put him for the driver that DNFs. And I don't know how wild this prediction is, but I've said Lance Stroll continues to score points. Now, do we think that is wild enough, or do you guys want me to change that?
Should we say top 8?
You know what? I'm happy to put that because I think he will finish top 8.
But then it isn't the wet and it is Lance Stroll. But then he has actually been doing quite well this season. That's the insane thing. We haven't really talked about that much. But
I'm going to say finish top 8. I think that's probably fair.
Okay.
If we are assuming it's wet, we're going to have a few incidences. And that
is 5 points for the prediction, which is the highest amount you can get for a single thing on
yes.
The
and so I think that's valid. I think it needs to be a little bit more specific. So I think that's probably fair, finishing top 8. But that rounds off the end of this episode 7 of the Warwick F1 show. We will be back at some point next week to review the events of the Japanese Grand Prix. I want to thank our 3 guests for coming on today. It's a bit of an early morning recording, so I thank them particularly for that. So thank you to Oran, Daniel, and Callum for coming on, and we will see you guys in the next episode. Thank you guys for listening or watching, and we will see you then. Goodbye.